happen. We have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm.
I'm Ann Northrop. We're having a little computer problem, so you may actually not see our names under us, so you'll just have to
Andy
remember.
Humm.
Ann Northrop.
Okay. The big news, of course, this week is that President Obama has nominated Merrick Garland, a black lesbian socialist, for the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, it sounds like it could be a black lesbian socialist, doesn't it?
No.
Oh, here's James Esseks.
Oh,
look at that. I'm like early.
Yeah, well, stay there at the moment because we're taping. We'll have you join us momentarily.
Yes, our guest. Yes, and our guest is James Esseks, director of the ACLU LGBT and HIV Project, who will discuss that and the challenge of anti-LGBT laws that are passing in state legislatures like Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri, Kansas, and others.
Oh, we could go on. But the other big thing this week was Hillary Clinton praising the record of Ron and Nancy Reagan on the AIDS epidemic and the firestorm that ensued. We're going to show you Hillary's horrible statement, but talk about how this has put AIDS into the campaign.
The new White House LGBT liaison is an out transgender Jewish woman of color.
That's checking a lot of boxes. Maybe she should actually be the Supreme Court nominee. Kokomo, Indiana has passed its LGBT rights law.
The Vatican censured a gay-themed film, giving it a big boost at the box office in Italy.
The Tony-winning Broadway show Fun Home is set to hit the road this fall.
And Xena the Warrior Princess is set to come back as an out lesbian this time.
All right, well, we should say a word about Merrick Garland in the Supreme Court, although we'll have a little more discussion with James Esseks about him. We think he's very centrist. We'd like the Senate not to confirm him so Hillary can be elected and appoint someone more liberal.
He's also 63 years old, and we were hoping for someone who would last a couple of generations like they usually do.
Please.
Not that you can't when you're 63 these days, I hope.
Me too. Here's what we know about.
Jeffrey Toobin said this might be some inducement for Republicans to take him because Hillary could appoint a 42-year-old.
But they don't have to decide that till after the November election because they could confirm him after that, especially if they lose the Senate.
And everything in that case, and it's all politics, everything about confirmation would depend upon who the new Senate is. If the Democrats win, they can confirm anybody they want.
Merrick Garland, in some old decisions, we don't have a full record yet, but as we tape, we know that he once upheld the discharge of a gay man from the Navy, that he upheld the FCC against a gay low-power radio station, and that he rejected any punishment of police in D.C. for pepper spraying gay protesters at George Bush's original inauguration.
He's kind of a law and order guy. I mean, he's the one who headed up the prosecution of the Oklahoma City bomber in 1995.
And we care about this even more so because there are a lot of issues that are going to come before the court in the next few years, like the legality of the Religious Freedom Restoration Acts.
All the things we're going to talk to James Esseks about.
Yes, so we'll get to that. So the other big headline this week was Nancy Reagan and Hillary Clinton. Nancy Reagan's funeral. Hillary Clinton is attending as a former First Lady, member of the First Ladies Club. And so Hillary is giving an interview to Andrea Mitchell on MSNBC, not directly from a seat at the funeral, but, alongside.
And she picked a scab off a very deep wound.
Well, she was talking, as one does at funerals, in laudatory fashion about the former First Lady and how good she was on stem cell research and blah, 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 blah. And then without prompting from Andrea, Hillary says, and one other point I'd like to make. Can we roll that tape?
It may be hard for your viewers to remember how difficult it was for people to talk about HIV/AIDS back in the 1980s. And because of both President and Mrs. Reagan, in particular Mrs. Reagan, we started a national conversation when before nobody would talk about it, nobody wanted to do anything about it. And you know, that too is something that I really appreciate with her very effective, low-key advocacy, but it penetrated the public conscience and people began to say, hey, we have to do something about this too.
So here is this unbelievable statement from Hillary Clinton that not only falsely gives Nancy and Ron Reagan credit for starting a national conversation about the AIDS epidemic, but says that no one else was talking about it at the time.
Well, not just that, but you know, of course, what the famous, and she has not yet acknowledged this in all of her apologies. What the Reagan record is a monstrous neglect, an active neglect, so that this. And this is why this is important,
yes,
because that's what let the virus get out of control for
sure,
6 years,
yes,
and become a worldwide pandemic. Most times when you have a deadly virus or you know, or even a mysterious thing, as AIDS was in the beginning, going around, you get all hands on deck, you have a national emergency. You know, look what they do when Ebola could possibly sneak into the country.
Does Legionnaire's disease ring a bell?
Which was prior to the AIDS crisis.
Exactly.
So, I mean, the Reagans were, I mean, and, you know, I mean.
Monsters.
Yeah, I mean.
War criminals.
I mean, there was, I mean, when he finally decided to talk about AIDS, Ronald Reagan, and I was there to boo him in 1987, he did appoint an AIDS commission, which was full of right-wing nuts. And they do credit Nancy with saying, you gotta have a gay on this. So, so apparently that's why he put a guy who was on this show. What was his name? Dr. Oh, I'll have it here somewhere.
Well, the other thing that Chuck Todd says she gets credit for is saving Everett Koop's job after he issued the Surgeon General's report without checking with the White House. The report that was sent to every household in America that talked explicitly about prevention and safe sex, right, and all of that.
Frank Lilly was there. Well, Bill knows him because he was there all the time. Frank Lilly was a doctor from the Bronx who was a geneticist who was on the board of GMHC, and that's where.
So Hillary, within a couple of hours, as the firestorm of criticism erupted, said, "I misspoke. I'm sorry," in a tweet.
And that was pretty weak. And
very weak.
Even her most of her most ardent supporters were slamming her and saying she has shaken my faith in her and all this kind of stuff.
I talked to a lot of people who were excusing it and saying, "So she made a mistake." So
I'm talking about a lot of leaders like Peter Staley and you know, who's a strong Hillary supporter.
Yeah, but there are a lot of
Charlie Kaiser.
A lot of supporters who were not AIDS activists who were giving her a pass.
Richard Socarides, who worked for the Clinton administration, told the Washington Post, "Well, you have to understand this in the context of a funeral." No, Richard, what are you, angling for a job in this Clinton administration? I hope she doesn't appoint people like that.
I do understand going to a funeral and trying to speak nicely of the dead if there is a guest at the funeral. But I do not understand taking a record of a war criminal and turning it into she is responsible for starting the national conversation about AIDS.
Here's what it reminded me of. In those days, we were alone. We were totally alone. We had no allies. I mean, the New York Times wouldn't cover this epidemic. The first national television piece was Joe Lovett, who helped with our opening, by the way, doing a piece on 2020 with Geraldo Rivera on AIDS that really did start a national conversation, I think, about it. So we were alone. And you know, you'd visit your family sometime, even my family, who I was an out gay activist, and they were like, they were clueless about this. I mean, you could try to tell them, but they didn't tune into it.
That's the question, is how clueless was Hillary?
Yes, and what was she doing in those days?
And why was she so ignorant of this? And the fact is, people are ignorant, and the point I've had to make to friends in the last week about this is, you know, we know ourselves. We think we're pretty out there in the world, especially today. But the fact is we are still ignored, overlooked, and misunderstood. And certainly 30 years ago that was true. But But she went on in a longer statement the next day to say, I care deeply about this. And she has, done a lot over the ensuing years. But she talked about how, at the 92 convention, we had 2 speakers with AIDS, and we did this and we did that, and I voted for PEPFAR very proudly. Well, the reason they had 2 speakers with AIDS at the convention was because activists forced them to do it. They weren't stepping up to do it. I was one of them. I was in a meeting with Bill Clinton the night before the convention opened of AIDS activists. And PEPFAR, Bush's program, was because Bush did not want the United States in the global effort on AIDS, the global organization, because he didn't want the U.S. subject to working with other countries on this. He wanted an individual U.S. effort, and he wanted to be able to set rules like, we're going to give money to organizations to work in Africa who can not work with prostitutes to prevent AIDS. So. And we want to give money to all these Christian fundamentalist groups to do the work. So PEPFAR may have gotten a lot accomplished, and the Clinton Initiative may have gotten a lot accomplished, but none of these are perfect organizations. So AIDS activists are now demanding a meeting with Clinton and other candidates. And what they did do was this got Hillary's campaign and Bernie's campaign to answer a coalition questionnaire.
A new questionnaire, because they'd already answered one from Jim H.C.
And Hillary, for the first time, talked about HIV criminalization laws, which she needed to do.
I would, look, we're complaining because we went through the devastation of AIDS, and now the world is, and that's not exactly a parochial issue. But I would like us to use this moment to look at all the issues that we're still ignoring right now, that nothing is being done about. Now, I hear Bernie and Hillary talking about wealth inequality, gun violence, massive student debt, over-criminalization of sex offenders, and world hunger. Well, they don't talk about that, the sex offender thing. But all manner of diseases that are out there that we don't do anything about. We talk about them, but we don't do anything about them. And if they're urgent problems, do something about them.
Well, that raises the question of what they can do about them and how much any politician can accomplish. Certainly a good Supreme Court nominee would be one thing they could accomplish.
Yes.
So on that note, shall we pivot?
Yes, absolutely.
Should we pivot? Mr. Esseks, please come in.
We rushed you up here, but we've given you a chance to cool off.
I would have thought they would have put your microphone on, but not. Okay, well, we will vamp.
Working on it.
Okay.
We're working on it.
James Esseks, one of our most frequent, because he is one of our most favorite, guests.
Is director of the LGBT and HIV project of the ACLU. One of the people who was the team on the Windsor case, which we won.
Part of the team on the Windsor case and on the Obergefell case, sort of.
And you're all scruffy around
and I'm all
the mouth
scruffy.
now.
I decided to get with the program and have a little bit of facial hair, and I'm trying it out.
Does this come from your visit to Italy?
We'll get to that.
Yes, this predated Italy.
Okay.
All right. So really why we have been very eager to talk to you for weeks, actually, is all this stuff going on in the States, which, aside from this week, has been leading our program for the last few months. Because the attention has shifted from marriage. We all thought we'd get a breather, but in fact, the right wing is just crashing down on us all over the country, state by state. And you and the ACLU are very involved in many of these fights across the country.
Yeah, we are. And I totally like the way you introduced that, because what we're seeing in the state legislatures is absolutely a reaction to our wins. And so these are, look, we're in kind of difficult times, and these are terrible problems to have. But one way to step back and look at this is to be like, look, these are problems that come from the fact that, from a bigger perspective, our movement is making progress, not just on marriage, although that was obviously a big step forward, but also in terms of the country's understanding of who we are.
Yes.
And I think that the push by our opponents in state legislatures is all about stopping the advance of LGBT equality. And the bills fall into 2 different kinds of buckets. One about specifically anti-transgender bills, and the other about religious exemption bills that come in a variety of flavors. But they're both really not so much just about, or not even primarily about, religious exemptions or primarily about beating up on transgender people, although they do. They're about stopping our efforts to get LGBT non-discrimination protections, which we still need explicitly at the federal level, and we still need in most of the states in the country.
I would say it's people who are scared or angry or whatever, not unlike the Trump electorate, sort of beating their hands against some wall or something and saying, I don't want to have to move forward. I don't want to be part of any of this.
And yes, I think that's part of it. And they have seized upon two issues: religious exemptions, a sense that, hey, the country is devoted to religious liberty, which it is, and that somehow, therefore, it should dilute equality rights, which it shouldn't. And this, they are taking advantage of, they are stoking transphobia in this country to use it against trans people, absolutely, but also to stop our progress and shut down our ability to pass non-discrimination laws that protect trans people, but also protect lesbian, gay, and bisexual people.
And a lot of these bills were scotched last year. I mean, they were stopped, and they're going forward this year. Although they've been stopped in some places.
Yes and no.
Stopped in some places, but they're passing now in ways that they didn't last year.
Well, let's break this down a little.
Sure.
Let's. Should we start subject by subject?
Sure.
Start either trans or
let's start
religious?
let's start with the trans
Okay.
Anti-trans bills. So, starting with the good news in South Dakota, which I know you guys have covered. The bill that we managed to get vetoed by the governor, 2 weeks ago now, was a bill that said that restroom use by school children would be restricted to, and I think that one was based on, you could only use it based on the anatomy or chromosomes as identified at birth.
So if I were born a woman and I look like this, I would have to use the women's room looking like this.
Yes, which makes no sense.
Insane.
Yes. And look, the messages that got us to the veto were putting trans people front and center, putting trans kids in the schools, some trans adults and the parents of trans kids out in front of the newspapers, on the radio, and also getting them an audience with the governor so that they could make this a concrete, personal, real-life situation and choice for him.
How'd you do it?
Well, public pressure saying, hey, how in the world can you sign a bill that affects these people's lives in such a dramatic way without even talking to them? It was a hard thing to say no to, and I got to say, we were expecting that he would say no. We and other advocates.
Maybe we can even get senators to talk to Merrick Garland.
We'll see.
If we want to, that's another. We'll get to that. But I can't imagine, for instance, Sam Brownback in Kansas talking to trans kids.
Well, look, it's not a strategy that's going to work everywhere, but
Yeah.
South Dakota is one of the most conservative parts of the country.
Yes.
And this is a supermajority Republican legislature, both houses, and a Republican governor. So this was not an easy
It was
context.
amazing.
And they're not overriding him.
And they're not overriding him. They will assuredly come back next year with some version of one of these bills.
And some of it was financial for him.
And some of it was also financial, because we have an amazing ally in the Obama Department of Education on this issue, because the Education Department has said that Title IX, which bans sex discrimination by public schools or recipients of federal funds, that so it bars sex discrimination, and the Education Department has said that means, that includes a ban on gender identity discrimination, and that means people get to use sex-segregated facilities like restrooms based on their gender identity, not based on sex assigned at birth, which is a righteous and appropriate interpretation of that law, and also means that school districts that violate Title IX risk all of their federal funds, and there isn't a school district in this country that doesn't receive federal funding.
Has that been applied yet to any of these places?
They haven't taken the funding away yet, but they have started enforcement proceedings against a suburban Chicago school district over a locker room issue. And that got the school district to change its policy in a way it didn't want to. And it certainly got the attention of school boards all around the country. And it was a primary part of the South Dakota governor's veto message, saying we have concerns here about whether we're going to lose funding and also about how expensive the litigation is going to be, because we and others said, if you sign that thing, we're going to be suing school districts all around South Dakota. This same dynamic is now playing out in Tennessee, where there's a similar bill. It's tied, the restroom access is tied to your gender marker on your birth certificate, which in Tennessee, you can't change. Whether you've had surgery or you've done anything, you just can't change it. There are 3 states like that in the country.
Do you have a case around this?
Well, we're,
First things first.
First things first. Look, I do think it is profoundly wrong and should be unconstitutional, and we're exploring if there's anything to do there, but we're really not sure. And we're hopeful that we can get this bill stopped. The governor, helpfully, has said that he has some concerns about loss of federal funding, as he should. But the bill passed out of a House subcommittee yesterday and is, I think, scheduled for hearings in both houses next week.
So some sunshine or hope where it remains with the legislature and the governors, because they are aware of these competing interests. But the big one we lost was in Houston, where it was a public referendum.
Yes.
Are we going to see more public referendums?
Well, there's a possibility of a referendum in Washington State that would likely be on the ballot in November. Our opponents have filed a ballot language with, I think, the Secretary of State there. They're in the process where it's got to go through a process before they can start gathering signatures. But then the threshold, the number of signatures they need to gather, is not all that large. And so we may have a ballot campaign on restroom access in Washington.
So I'm going to ask you this on each subject, but how subject are these laws to legal challenge?
Well, we think that the specifically anti-trans bills, especially in the schools context, violate Title IX. And so the schools that comply with these state laws, as opposed to complying with federal law, are absolutely wide open in terms of liability under the federal law. And I have no doubt that there will be lots of lawsuits, and we'll see how they all come out.
All right, let's switch to religious liberty, which seems to me a trickier subject.
Well, it's confusing in this, and our opponents are using that against us, because look, this is a country, a founding principle of the United States is religious liberty. People came here to escape religious doctrine being imposed upon them, and that's a core thing that we all embrace as Americans. It's protected by the Constitution. But freedom of religion doesn't give anybody the right to discriminate against other people, to impose.
They think it does.
Well, they think it does, but I can't impose my religious beliefs on you just because they're my religious beliefs.
So some of these laws, the most egregious ones, say basically if you have any religious objection, conscience objection to anything, you don't have to serve gays, you don't have that kind of stuff, or Jews or Muslims or whoever you don't want on a religious objection. And those, that's what Indiana tried to do. And
yes, that's what Indiana tried to do last year, and what Arizona tried to do in 2014. And in both cases, there was a big public outcry saying these bills are designed to authorize discrimination, especially against LGBT people. And in Arizona, it was vetoed, and in Indiana, it was fixed, at least partially fixed.
And there are others to worry about, and they want to do it as a constitutional amendment in Missouri.
They want to do it as a constitutional amendment in Missouri. But one thing I want to point out here is the Arizona bill and the Indiana bill were both RFRA laws, and were just as broad as you were talking about, Andy. Our opponents have kind of shifted strategy a little bit this year in a way that I find odd, quite frankly. And we know this in part because they told a New York Times reporter, and there was a New York Times article a couple of weeks ago, where they said, well, we were having trouble with these RFRAs, these Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, because they could do so many different things just to so many different people, which is totally true. So we decided that we needed to be more specific, and they now have a narrower set of bills that they are pushing, including in Missouri, that are aimed exclusively or almost exclusively at LGBT people. So despite the fact that much of the public outcry against the RFRA in Arizona and the RFRA in Indiana was because it was going to authorize LGBT discrimination, they've decided to double down on LGBT discrimination and with these laws that are really a response to the marriage decision.
Now,
well, they specifically enumerate religious objections to same-sex marriage.
Exactly.
And that strikes me as just a violent misreading or contrary to Romer v. Evans, the Supreme Court decision that said you can't single us out.
Yes, you can't treat us differently than everybody else. And so, look, I think that I hope we kill all these bills. If they pass in a way that treats LGBT people or same-sex couples specifically differently than everybody else, I think there's a constitutional claim there.
What about what I believe it's Kentucky is trying to do, which is to talk about only in creative realms, expressive realms will this apply. If it's just regular goods and services, you can't discriminate. If you're selling groceries or something. But if it's like a wedding photographer, a baker, these kinds of things, that's the kind of things they say what they want to protect. They did add this in now.
Yeah, no, they did add that in. But two things about that. One is the part of the bill that they talk about is this expressive piece. What they don't talk about is that the rest of the language talks about customized products or services. I'm a lawyer. My products and services are customized. They better be. And customized is a loophole that you can drive a truck through.
But we actually, and we don't want to give any support to these legislations, but we've had concerns about some of these things, and they said one of the things that triggered this case was a ruling by a local human rights commission that said a T-shirt maker had to make a gay pride T-shirt. Now, I always thought that printers in general who wanted to publish books, they didn't want to print pornography, they didn't have to. I mean, there are some expressive claims that people could make.
Well, I think the question is whether the non-discrimination rules apply in a context or not, and whether what's going on in a certain situation was actually motivated by the idea, I don't want to serve gay people, or I don't want to promote this message. In lots of these contexts, it's quite clear that they don't want to. They will provide this service to gay people, to straight people, straight couples, and they won't provide it to gay couples. Right. The T-shirt context is different, different in the following sense: that I don't know the facts well, but I think there's a factual question: was the T-shirt seller actually motivated by saying, "I don't want to actually deal with gay people," or was it about the message? Right. In one context, I think it's unlawful. In the other context, I think it's protected.
But you would say that, for instance, a baker doesn't have to put a message on a cake that they disagree with. If it's just like the message, I support same-sex marriage or something like that. Whereas if it's just a wedding cake that you're selling to a gay couple, that's different.
Yes, and I think that the line between whether it's just the message or it's the person that you're selling it to is not always super clear. But in general, I think that's right. Look, the Kentucky bill is a bad thing because it allows discrimination by businesses that are open to the public. And being open to the public, they should be open to everybody. And it allows discrimination only with regard to gay people and same-sex couples who want to get married. So there's no reason that the rules for us should be different than the rules for everybody else.
Okay.
I want to hopscotch a few more minor things. Puerto Rico, the rogue judge who just said, no same-sex marriage here. Idiot.
It doesn't make any sense. Will clearly be overturned on appeal if it even survives that far. And I think the governor of Puerto Rico has said, we're not following that ruling.
Okay. Brilliant move in Alabama to get the state out of marriage license business, and you don't even have to have a ceremony. You just have to submit papers saying you're married that are notarized.
Yes, and look, this bill, I think, comes from a dark place.
Of course,
right?
of course.
But the only thing that I can see that is potentially a problem, but this isn't particularly a problem for same-sex couples, is that it's not clear whether you have to have something more formal in order to be recognized by the federal government
or
as
other
married,
states,
or other states.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that there is a problem, but I know a question has been raised, and I'm not sure how that comes out.
I think they claim that this will be certified as a marriage if you submit the proper notarized paper. But I find it hilarious that you don't have to get a license.
Speaking of which, are we done with Kim Davis?
So the
We're
case
back in
is
Kentucky.
Back in Kentucky with our good friend Kim Davis. The case continues. There are a whole series of claims waiting before the Sixth Circuit Appeals Court for that part of the country, and so there are pieces of it still alive.
And the issue is that the court has allowed her to do different kinds of marriage licenses that don't have to be signed by the clerk in order to get married.
Yes, which we think is wrong, but that's where we are. And I think part of what's going on here is also a question about, is the legislature in Kentucky going to change anything about the marriage licensing process? And there is a bill pending in Kentucky that actually would have Kentucky would be the only state that do this, to have two different marriage license forms, one for husband and wife and one for other folks.
Partner and partner.
Yeah, and so there's a gay marriage license and a straight marriage license. That seems to me to violate the Constitution, to violate Obergefell.
And separate and
We're
unequal.
trying, many people have tried to say to members of that legislature, why are you picking that fight?
What about universities and the fact that many religious schools are seeking waivers from the Obama administration and getting them getting free of Title IX in the sense that they want to discriminate against gay people, and the administration is saying
and still get federal funding.
Still get federal funding. Now this week the news development was there's a big petition to get the NCAA to drop these schools from the NCAA. But is that something we can? Is the Obama administration right to do this or wrong?
Well, so I think, unfortunately, the language of Title IX is pretty clear that if a school asks for the exemption, it gets the exemption. I think that what they're doing is now publishing. I believe they're publishing the list of schools that have asked. Yeah. But also, this is something. It's important for us to sort of understand that, this wave of requests for exemptions is absolutely about gay people and gay people getting married.
Absolutely.
But this is not the first time that there's been a wave of requests for exemptions, because in the 70s, there was a wave of requests for exemptions from schools, and it was all about abortion issues. And they wanted, and women's rights things. So, and the administrations at that time issued 100, 200, I'm not, something like that in terms of waivers. So this is something that's been used against other communities as well.
So back to the more general, I must say, knowing that all these hundreds of bills were being proposed all across the country, I would have been surprised if we won anything. And now I see Oklahoma has rejected all their bills. The governor of South Dakota vetoed the bad trans bathroom bill. The governor of Georgia is trying to negotiate out of a bad RFRA bill. I'm surprised that we're winning as much as we are.
Well, yeah, so we are doing well. The problem is, to really do well in the face of 130 bills this session, you want to beat them all. Sure. And the odds are kind of against us. And we will experience any loss as a serious loss, because it will be a serious loss, because it affects people's lives in a serious way. But when you step back and look at our track record in 2014 and our track record in 2015 and our track record so far this year, what I see is a very successful effort on our side to defeat the overwhelming majority of the religious exemption bills. The anti-trans bills have only shown up in a serious way this year. And we're doing better than we certainly thought we were going to do after Houston.
Right.
Because we're figuring out a little bit better how to do the advocacy and what messages work. So I am hopeful, and I think that the major narrative that's coming out of this on both sides is that this is really about discrimination. This isn't about religious liberty. This is about discrimination, about enabling anti-LGBT discrimination and enabling, in the RFRA context, other kinds of discrimination against women particularly. And that is actually why our opponents say that they shifted from these broader RFRA bills to the narrower anti-LGBT or marriage bills, because they said RFRAs have become politically toxic. That is a political success for us, having reframed the country's understanding of what these bills are.
And the polling is on our side on that.
It is.
And when we get to the Supreme Court?
Well, look, if the religious exemption issue gets to the Supreme Court, I mean, look, it may well be a close case, and I will be personally very nervous about it. But I'm also actually optimistic about it, because if you look at Justice Kennedy's opinion for the court in Obergefell, he has a short passage about religious liberty, and he says, of course, religious liberty is important, and people can continue to believe whatever they want to believe. All four dissenters go on at length about how this is, the decision itself is a terrible violation of religious liberty.
But he's no longer with us.
Well, so one of them, Justice Scalia, is no longer with us. But Justice Kennedy was not buying that. Mm-hmm. And I hope that means that he also won't buy it in the context of bakers and photographers and florists, because those are some of the examples that the dissenters talked about in their opinions. So I am optimistic, even though we're not out of the woods. And
you heard our little riff on Merrick Garland. Mm-hmm. We're just at a few hours after he was nominated. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to say about that?
So no. The ACLU. So I'm here with my ACLU hat on. The ACLU does not take positions on Supreme Court nominees, although we will be putting out a report on his civil liberties record. Okay. And he's been on the bench for a good long time, so he's written a bunch. And so that's his. We'll have to wait and see what the ACLU says.
There is one more set of bills that are passing, mm-hmm. and some have been upheld in the past, and that is to override all local LGBT laws in the state. Yes. And that's what state legislatures are looking at also, and some of them are doing it. And I know Arkansas, they did it, but it's not working out so well for the right wing.
It's not, and I'm proud of that, because there's a Fayetteville said, hey, we have an ordinance and we're going to continue to enforce it, and they got sued by some people who said, no, we passed this bill. And the courts so far have said, no, that bill doesn't actually override.
But that's because state law had mentioned sexual orientation.
Yes. They found a little
hate crime law.
Tricky moment.
It did, but
it's been upheld elsewhere, though.
All right.
Mississippi, I believe. But
the override.
Yeah. So, and look, the next place we may see this is North Carolina, but we're in response to Charlotte's addition of LGBT folks to the public accommodations bill. Yes. But we don't know at this point what that bill is going to look like. It may be a preemption bill, and it may be something else.
Last footnote, you were in Italy recently in the midst of the hubbub over civil unions there. What can you tell us from ground level?
Well, so, I mean, on the positive side of things, I was really impressed at the level of organization of the LGBT community over there. They managed to pull together about 1 million people showing up in 100 cities across Italy, and Italy is a country of 60 million people total, to support civil unions. Now, civil unions, it's kind of like 10 years ago,
It's Italy, we understand.
Yes, but they got a lot of straight people out in the streets to support their family members on a step towards equality. And look, what they got was they've got a bill. It's passed one chamber. The other chamber shouldn't be a problem, but it's a seriously watered down bill. Yeah. And they took out the step parent adoption provisions. And what wasn't immediately obvious to me at the beginning of this was just how sort of narrow this adoption thing that they took out was, because it's not full-on adoption, what they called over there regular adoption or legitimating adoption. They have this special adoption in special circumstances provision that they've had for straight folks for a while, I never quite got a handle on exactly why, but it's much more narrow. And
It's about surrogacy.
Yeah.
but we couldn't even get that.
Sophia Loren couldn't get divorced.
Yes. So, but it is progress. Look, Italy is, in Europe, Italy is bringing up the rear.
Or it was her husband who couldn't get divorced,
Yes.
her partner, excuse me.
Yeah.
People will yell at me for that.
So, I mean, the last time you were here, we were celebrating the Obergefell decision, and obviously we all felt terrific. What are you feeling now about where we are?
Look, the big picture, I feel like we have, as a movement, we've made incredible progress. But the progress that we've made is progress that happens at a relatively early stage of a civil rights movement. We have managed to and had to get rid of laws that require discrimination against us. Had to get rid of DOMA and the marriage bans and the criminal sodomy laws and the immigration ban and don't ask, don't tell, and you can go on and on. All these big things that we've accomplished, they're all step one problems. After you get rid of that, you've got to pass civil rights laws. That's what we're trying to do now. Right. And then even when we've done all of that, we have lived equality work to do because we know from our experience with race and gender that it's not enough to get rid of the bad laws and to pass the civil rights laws.
It's still fighting those battles.
Absolutely.
If we pass the Federal Equality Act, which the ACLU played a huge role in getting rid of all the terrible amendments that were in the old DOMA bill, not DOMA, ENDA bill and all those things. If we pass that, will it override all of these state laws?
It will. So override is the wrong word.
Okay.
It will mean that we have civil rights protections for LGBT people everywhere in the country. The thing to keep an eye on is the current bill covers basically every context that's important in the federal civil rights landscape. The question is, a bill that actually passes, does it continue to cover all those contexts? State laws will still be important because state laws often provide a wider range of remedies as compared to federal law.
But they can't do less than
as we've seen over and over with state non-discrimination laws when we don't have a federal non-discrimination law.
Well,
all right. Well, thank you for bringing us up to date, and we will talk more.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for coming down.
Thanks.
Take this,
Or up.
slide out, take your stuff. We're very informal here, as you know.
Thank you, James.
Okay. I
James
think that's
Esseks,
mine.
Director of
That's
the
mine.
LGBT and
Yeah, that's
HIV
okay.
Project at the ACLU.
Yes.
Go to aclu.org and read more about it.
Absolutely. All right. On to other news.
Well, we'll get to that in the
All right.
national
Well,
news.
next on our headline list was the new White House LGBT Liaison,
Yes.
Raffi Friedman
Gerspan, yes.
She's been working in the White House, and she has just been appointed in the personnel office, I guess, or
Yes.
I don't know the whole title. But she is the new LGBT liaison in the White House. She is from Honduras originally. She is out trans, and
First, out trans to hold the position.
and Jewish.
Apparently, the first White House liaison we had was not even gay.
No, that's true. It was Marcia Scott, wasn't
Right.
it? Yeah. All right, so that's one
Well,
thing.
and she was also an advisor for the National Center for Transgender Equality, and everybody seems very happy about that.
In Philadelphia, a judge has rejected the request by Catherine Knott to serve no jail time.
She was involved in a gay bashing, and
Yeah.
she's the only one who didn't take a plea. Two males took a plea in the case. She got 5 to 10 months. This left the survivors severely injured of this attack.
Yes.
She wanted probation like the male co-defendants, but when you refuse a plea, you refuse a plea. Catherine?
Another probable case coming up in California. A barber refused to cut the hair of a trans man who's a veteran of serving in Afghanistan for the United States.
The barber said, I don't offer cuts to women based on my religious beliefs. He's from the Church of God. That's the name of his church. He says women should have long hair, and God teaches a very clear distinction between the genders. And I don't know why.
It's their glory. It's their covering.
Well,
so
so
I'm not cutting.
California law is very clear on the subject, and so he will lose.
In New York, Elliot Morales, who shot and killed Mark Carson in 2013, was convicted of second-degree murder.
His lawyer didn't do a very good job for him.
He was the lawyer. They'd encountered each other on the street. Morales was drunk. He'd been waving his gun around. He'd threatened people at a restaurant earlier.
With anti-gay slurs.
With anti-gay slurs.
All throughout.
And then he saw these two gay friends walking down the street and started shouting slurs at them, said, come around the corner, and then was waving a pistol and shot one of them dead.
Mark Carson.
Yes, he said, I was acting defensively.
Yeah.
And then he said, I don't remember what happened because I was drunk. Yes, and you are convicted.
Yes. The out gay candidate for Secretary of the Army, Eric Fanning, was confirmed as Army Secretary by the Senate Armed Services Committee.
Yes.
That is moving forward.
Well, his full Senate approval is technically on hold still by Kansas Senator Pat Roberts, which is just a maneuver by Roberts to object to Obama's attempt to close Guantanamo. So he's holding up the nomination of the Army Secretary.
The Senate doesn't seem to do anything these days.
Well, it's all a cat and mouse game in politics these days, as
but we
you
have
don't
too,
need
we have,
us
we
to
have
tell
too
you.
many rules that impede the people's business.
By the way, my new favorite show to analyze all the nonsense going on, Samantha Bee's Full Frontal on TBS, really sharp, really good.
Yeah,
I'm
she is
enjoying
terrific.
that. Monday nights at 10:30. Yeah.
In Guam, a court ordered the government to pay $85,000 in legal expenses to a lesbian couple who they applied to get married and they were denied, contrary to the advice of the Attorney General. So the court said, pay them.
And as we referred to with James, in Alabama, the Senate has voted to eliminate state marriage licenses because they don't want to give marriage licenses to same-sex couples. They want to relieve clerks of this burden. So now the new law says you don't have to have a license. You don't even have to have a ceremony. You just have to fill out a form and submit it to whatever government office, and it has to be notarized, saying that you are now married and that you're eligible to be married, that you're not married to anyone else, that you're of age or whatever. But it's a fascinating development in Alabama.
In Illinois, one of our viewers in Evanston, Douglas Bogenhagen, he lost his husband, Jerry, in 2012, and they had married in Iowa in 2009. And the Social Security Administration twice denied them survivor benefits, but an Illinois administrative law judge just granted his claim because he was persevering. And he says that he met Jerry in 1980 and they were never parted, and now he'll be getting his just benefits, as you should. Well, the whole point of this is states were denying these Social Security benefits if you lived in a state that didn't yet have same-sex marriage, even though you were married. Now
Legally married in another state, you move to a state or live in a state that didn't allow it before Obergefell, and Social Security was denying it.
Right.
Now they say they've updated that, but it's a struggle. And the governor of Puerto Rico has said that couples can ignore the decision by the rogue judge against same-sex marriage, and that Puerto Rico will appeal that.
In the NCAA basketball March Madness that's underway, we have our first out gay player. We hope we still have him. Oh, maybe we don't. His name is Derek Gordon of Seton Hall. They're the number 6 seeded team.
Well, you remember 2 years ago, there he is with the trophy from the latest tournament. We talked about him having transferred from UMass to Seton Hall, and we were surprised because Seton Hall is a Catholic university, and he was an out gay man, and he is still an out gay man and playing for the Seton Hall team, and they're in the March Madness, and we'll follow Seton Hall now.
Yeah, a study by J. Walter Thompson Intelligence on Generation Z, I've never heard of them, they're the 13 to 20-year-olds, said 70%...
Aren't we going to run out of letters soon?
70%, there's only 26, 70% want gender-neutral bathrooms. 24% identify as bisexual. A third more say that they're neither completely heterosexual or homosexual, and 56% know someone who uses pronouns that are gender-neutral, they, them, or Z.
A couple of, you've watched the primary results. There were a couple of other interesting results out of this week's primary in Illinois. The state's attorney, Anita Alvarez, who had refused to prosecute the cops for killing the kid in the street, was defeated by a progressive candidate, Kim Foxx.
Oh.
And Tammy Duckworth, who is the very progressive vet,
Disabled vet.
yes, who's been in the House, has now won the Democratic nomination for the Senate against that closet case, Mark Kirk, Republican. So,
Well, that woman Hillary Clinton, who we were criticizing for her AIDS history recollections, she did very well this week, didn't she?
she did, as did Mr. Donald J. Trump.
Yes, he did.
So things seem to be on a path.
But there is an anti-Trump ad out by the GOP of the Republicans who are trying to stop him. It's women quoting the sexism of Donald Trump explicitly. Clinton leads Trump by 21 points among women. Obama won women by 12 points over Romney.
By the way, in San Diego, in the gay Hillcrest neighborhood, they lowered the pride flag to half-staff for Nancy Reagan. Whoosh! Explosion of anger. So they replaced the flag with an American flag and lowered that to half-staff.
For those of you a little younger than us, there has been a generational divide over a lot of this anger over AIDS, because if you lived through as an adult in the 80s, you just would have nothing but ferocity at the Reagans over what happened. And people who were a little younger are like, oh, well, you know. And
yes.
I was having this conversation in Little Rock, Arkansas, at a table with one of our viewers, and at the end about Nancy Reagan, all this kind of stuff, and this young Asian woman at the end of the table. I'm saying she's Asian, but she seemed very nice, and she said, "I was very interested in what you were saying. Ronald Reagan was my favorite president." And she pulls out a book this big out of her satchel about Ronald Reagan. And I'm like, I said, well, to us, he was a war criminal. She said, everybody has some faults, she said.
Those who forget history, blah, blah, blah. But I despair. I despair. The amnesia in the human race. Now, I won't even pin it on just this country.
Well, we've only got 100 years more. We may not be around for it. But
well, we're going to be flooded out by the end of the century.
Okay.
But we should note that the Equality PAC of the LGBT Equality Caucus in Congress has endorsed Hillary.
Yes, they have.
All right, international news. So in Italy, we were discussing Italy with James. There's an English movie called Weekend, a gay male movie. Came out, a year or two ago?
A couple of years ago, by Andrew Hay, who did the series Looking.
Yeah.
And and he also did the movie 45 Years.
Yep.
So that's what
Weekend was very popular.
Yes, but this is why they decided to run Weekend in Italy. Now, here's something I learned about Italy. Most of the theaters in the country are run by your local parish.
1,100 of them.
Your Catholic parish. And so the Vatican condemned the film, and the bulk of them banned the film. It only ran in 10 theaters, but it became the 19th highest grossing film. It had the highest per screen average because of all this anti-publicity from the Catholic bishops.
We have 5 minutes left.
All right, let's go.
In India, the legislature has again rejected a bill to decriminalize homosexuality.
In Guanajuato, in Mexico, a trans woman was sworn in as a council member there for the first time, and they voted to recognize her by her woman's name.
In Hong Kong, a court refuses a spousal visa to the British wife of a Hong Kong woman.
In Botswana, the High Court rejected the government ban on a gay rights lobby group. That's a big breakthrough for Africa.
Yes, that's good news. In Ukraine, bad news. A major city I can't pronounce, Lviv, canceled a pride event, even though Ukraine is seeking European Union membership.
But in northern Russia, in Kostomo, a judge ruled that the Pride March was wrongly banned and ordered monetary damages to Nikolai Alexeyev for $90.
In Slovenia, the government is offering civil unions without adoption or in vitro rights after the Catholic-backed referendum repealed the marriage law that was in effect for same-sex couples.
And in Australia, the plebiscite that the government is forcing on the people on same-sex marriage is going to cost $500 million instead of just voting in the legislature as they should.
Well, they're still debating voting in the legislature. It's still a mess. In Switzerland, the Senate has okayed second-parent adoption by those in civil unions. And in Bermuda, it looks like they will have the government has proposed anyway, a public referendum. Do you believe in marriage rights for same-sex couples? Do you believe in civil unions? Blah, blah, blah. But it's all very confusing because at the same time, they're trying to have the opposite-sex marriage only law trump the human rights law.
Okay.
It's a mess.
All right. AIDS news.
AIDS news.
In Indianapolis, Subway restaurants are having to pay out $50,000 to settle a federal discrimination suit brought by an HIV-positive employee by the EEOC.
So 50 AIDS organizations did form a coalition and write up a questionnaire for the presidential candidates. No Republican has answered the questionnaire. That should tell you something. But the Clinton and Sanders campaigns now have. If you're interested in reading their answers, they are available at AIDSunited.org.
In California, a adult film company owned by James Dean, his name is, was fined almost
D-E-E-N.
All right, was almost $80,000 for workplace safety violations, including $18,000 for failing to use condoms on the set.
In India, the government has told U.S. pharmaceutical companies that it will not invoke their right to sell generics to poor countries. This is not good news for the poor countries that would like to buy generic versions of drugs. This is propping up the U.S. pharmaceutical companies again.
In Giza, Egypt, police arrested two men for homosexuality, and one of the brothers of one of the women notified them that he has AIDS, you know. So they tested everybody in the place. And ordered all 177 inmates in the place tested.
Well, good. Everybody should be tested, but not for that reason.
Yeah, okay.
And aside from the coalition that got the questionnaires, an activist coalition of AIDS activists has asked Hillary Clinton and others for a meeting. Wants them all to appoint HIV advisors on their campaigns and make a more explicit commitment to ending the epidemic.
Okay. Entertainment news.
Yes.
So Fun Home, the play we love most in New York, the musical, is going on a national tour starting in October. It's going all over the country. All I'm going to say is you can go to funhomebroadway.com and find out if it's coming near you. It's going to a lot of cities.
I got a couple of things. I broke down to viewer requests and watched Gaycation, the Ellen Page series, visits to Japan, Brazil, Jamaica. I liked it better than I thought I was going to. Ellen Page says, being in the closet hurt my career way more than being out and being happy and feeling inspired again. And she got particularly inspired by watching But I'm a Cheerleader when she was 14 in Halifax.
Okay.
And I watched the BET honors. Lee Daniels was one of those honored. He said when he was 4 or 5, his grandmother said to him, "You're a faggot, but it's okay because you're going to do good things. Tell the truth."
Oh, my God.
It was great.
And Xena the Warrior Princess from the 90s, that series, which had a lesbian subtext, is being rebooted by NBC with all of that out of the closet.
Phew! We got it all in.
And you can tell us about Bride and Prejudice next week.
Oh, yes, Bride and Prejudice. Watch that series. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for coming.